The long-awaited Milwaukee Track Saw. Now last year we finally got the M18 FUEL mower, and the next thing on the list that everybody has been asking for is a track saw from Milwaukee. We've got the Milwaukee model number 2831, which is the 6.5-inch M18 FUEL Plunge Track Saw. Now this will plunge up to 2¼ inches, and that's without the track. With the track, it's going to be a little less, right at 2 inches as far as max depth of cut, and you're going to get up to 5,600 RPM from the blade. Now before I get into too much more detail, let's dive right in to take a closer look at each one of these features, and then we'll actually use this not on just plywood. We've also got some really hardwood to try this out on to see how well it works, test the power, as well as cut quality, as well as how true it is. So if you purchase the kit, the model number 2831-21 of the Milwaukee Track Saw, the Milwaukee 6.5-inch plunge cut track saw, this is what it will come in, this large pack out toolbox. So let's see what we get inside. So tucked away in the box, we get the 2831 track saw. We get a 40-tooth 6.5-inch blade. The dust bag, dust collector is down here in the bottom. Nice, tucks away nicely underneath the saw. That's a pretty good idea. 6 amp hour M18 battery. I believe we've charged this already. No, we have not, so we'll have to get another battery. So anyway, 6 amp hour M18 battery. You get an M12 M18 rapid charger. Good step up. And we get a splinter guard. We'll go over what that does in a moment and also how to initially install that. And then a bag of silica packets. These are real good in salsa. No, do not eat those. Not really good for you. Doesn't taste good either. Anyway, that's it. That's all we get in the pack here. Some people say, well, that's a real waste of space to use such a large toolbox. I think it's awesome. Anytime you can organize something, put it away, have a spot for it, especially in a multi-use shop, this is a great idea. Or for somebody on the go that's going to be using this to build stuff, you know, on job sites, things like that. Perfect scenario to keep things protected, and you know where the saw goes. So let's get this out of the way. So now we have the up close and personal 6.5-inch plunge cut track saw from Milwaukee M18 FUEL. So we know we have the brushless motor and the 6 amp hour battery is going to power it. I believe you can buy this as a bare tool as well, but I know initially I think a lot of the kits are going out. Anyway, so let's talk about the features of this saw. First off, we get a maximum cut depth of 2.5 inches, and to get down there, we just push this button here and shove the saw forward. Again, to release, just going to push this button right here. So very easy, very functional design, very ergonomic design. We have a trigger here to power the saw, but it does not depress until you release here, and then you can power it up and then plunge the saw down. Now, if we want to actually change the blade on the saw, we lift the lock here and then push the button, and it's going to push down and lock into place here to where we have access now to the arbor, to the Allen head screw right there, and we can install our blade, which we will do so in just a few moments. And then to release the lock, we just push this lever down, push the button, and it's going to return back to its resting position at the top. Now again, I mentioned a max cut depth of 2¼ inches. What we see here, we have a very easy to use, just push this button here with your thumb or with your finger, and we can adjust the depth stop up to where you need it. Also, if I want to set that, say, at 1 inch, so that's locking into place. And then you'll see here we have kind of a micro adjustment. You push the button, bring this down, and we have this little thumb screw right here where we can kind of set the micro adjustment. So we can actually measure our cuts and then know, okay, I need to trim that a little bit, make it a little deeper. Turn that a few turns, and now you can actually set that micro adjustment of your actual saw with your actual blade to know exactly where you're going to be cutting and how deep you're going to be cutting. Now you'll also notice there's a couple of lines here. There's a kind of a step right here. Well, the single line, we're not lining up the line or the two lines there. It's just letting you know that on this one here on the top edge is going to be if we're using this without a track or without the rail. Now, if we had the rail installed, then it's only going to be cutting as deep as this level here. So if I wanted 1 inch with the rail, then I'm going to move it down to there, and now sitting on the rail, it's going to have a max cut depth of 1 inch, or it's going to cut cutting depth of 1 inch. And you see I'm going to come down, and here's our stop now. So without the rail, we're cutting, I don't know, probably close to 1.25 inches, and with the rail, we're cutting right at 1 inch. Bevel adjustment is very easy on this saw. Really, all of the functions are very easy to do on this saw. So just your typical bevel from 0 to 45 degrees, you're going to loosen this thumb screw on the front, loosen this thumb screw on the rear that's down here underneath the dust port, and now the saw will easily go to whatever number between 0 and 45 that you want to, and then you can tighten that up and lock that down. Pretty typical of any beveling saw. However, we have some additional functionality. We can also go to -1 degree. If we want to do that, then we're going to push this forward, and you'll see it fall down to that -1 degree, and we can make our cut. And then if we want to raise it back up, just raise it back up. It's going to lock back into the 0, and again, lock us out at 45. But if we want to go to 48 degrees on the bevel, again, go to here, push it up, and now it's going to go to 48. And again, loosen your thumb screws, bring it back down. It's going to lock back out at 45 degrees. Right up here on the top of the handle is the Allen wrench that will be used for actually changing out the blades. Slides in there and very tightly stays in place. Then a couple of things on the blade side of the unit. First, right here, you have a viewing window. I have no blade in here or a battery, so I don't have to worry about getting cut, but this is a viewing window where you can actually see the blade and be able. This is actual viewing window where you can actually see the blade, and you can adjust this depending on what you're cutting and what you're cutting on, whether you're cutting on the rail or not on the rail. But it enables you to actually see in here, but it also be able to trap the air. In other words, provide better suction for dust evacuation without having just an open window of viewing the blade and a place for dust to escape, as well as with that hole blocked up, you're going to provide a better suction when you do have a vacuum attached, or even with the bag, or actually push the dust or push the particulate into the bag area, back through the dust port and into the bag area. You can also replace this with a splinter guard, and this enables you to actually lower this down and actually push on the wood where you're cutting, so you're not creating splinters and blowout when you're making those cuts. We also have a spring-loaded riving knife, so as the tool comes down, you will see that riving knife come down, but it is a spring-loaded riving knife as well, so you can plunge cut and have the riving knife, so it's just going to, as you plunge, and it's going to fall into that groove as you start pushing the saw, it's going to help eliminate some of those kickback potentials. Right here on top of the tool is our arbor lock or spindle lock, where we can lock out the blade, be able to change that out, and it won't rotate on us. And right here on the top, we have a little slide switch here. Slides back and forth, and you'll notice here when I slide it up and I push the button to go down, it only goes down a little ways, and what that is our scoring switch. So when we slide that up, it's going to lock out right there, and we can score the wood again, help eliminate some of that splintering. Slide that back, and now you can fully plunge the saw. Now let's talk about some of the features that when we're using it with a rail, that's why we're getting a track saw, right? When we're using this on a track, what's some of the additional functionality? And we'll see a couple of knobs here and another knob here, and let's get the rail and talk about it. So now we've got it sitting on the Milwaukee rail, pretty self-explanatory. Basically, your depression right here is going to rest right here on the track of the rail, or the track of the track. And that's where it's going to slide. It's going to slide on these Teflon strips right here. and it's a very, very smooth process. But what these are, you can see if I wiggle this saw, even though there's some great engineering done to keep those tolerances and those clearances at a minimum, there's still a little rocking there. Well, we can really true that up. If I turn this, there's like a cam activation in there. I'll show it to you in a moment, and really tighten that up. Now I can tighten it up so much that it doesn't want to slide. So back it off just a touch and get it to where it freely slides. There we go. So it's going to freely slide, but now I've got any of the rocking motion out of it. So it's not twisting anymore now that I have those cams locked out. And then if we want to lock it in, because right now I can still rock this saw out of this track or out of this rail. So if I want to lock that out, then I can push this button right here and turn that a quarter turn, and now it's actually locked into the rail. And I'll show you what's happening right there. So now we see underneath the saw, and here is the locking action here. So if I push this button and raise it up, you see that metal blade there is coming in and locking into the lip of that aluminum track. So that's what's happening there, and you have there's a button that you depress, and it's going to return and lock into place at closed and lock into place open as well. And then here's the little cam activation here. You see these two plastic things are actually squeezing on the track, and the more I turn it, the more pressure it's putting against that. And then if I back it all the way out, that's giving it additional clearance. So that's without those locked out, and we get that back and forth motion. Lock it out, and it's pretty hard to push. Back it off just a touch, and there we go. And then lock it in. And now you can see the track is going to go with me wherever I go, and it's still going to slide freely, but there's no rocking to and fro on the track. So you're going to get a nice consistent cut every single time when you tune that saw to the rail, and you probably should do that each time you put it on the rail, or at least each time that you're actually using this. Now let's take a look at the splinter guard. So right here we have the viewing window, and if we want to take that out, all we have to do is, you can see this slides up and down, but in its highest position, if you depress this, the book says to actually take your Allen wrench and do it, but you can do it with a finger. Push that down, and then it just slides right out. You can see that little locking tab locks into that window. And then on the splinter guard, take the thumb screw out, and then you're going to slide it on the rail, and then put the thumb screw back in. And so now you can adjust this where you need it and then lock it out. However, you'll notice the splinter guard, it actually gets in the way of the blade track, and that's meant to actually, you're going to make the cut kind of like we're going to do on the rail to actually set the clearance of this saw with the blade, because this splinter guard is going to ride right against that blade, and it's also going to ride right down on the wood to try to eliminate any of that splintering. So we actually have to do a clearance on this once we have the blade installed. So let's go ahead and take this back off and install the blade. So I'm going to flip the lever here, push it down, it's going to lock into place. And by the way, I don't have to push the button when I flip that lock. It's going to now lock into place. Now, since this is a blade right saw, then our screw here is going to be typical threads. So counterclockwise to release it. Now we'll come over, flip our lock, push the button, and now we're returned back. So now we have our blade installed, and we're ready to cut. Let's go ahead and return our window. And something else I did not mention, number one, I mentioned the 2 1/4 inch max depth cut that's at 0 degrees or at 90. At 45 degrees, the max cut depth is going to be 1 5/8 of an inch. Also, as far as speed goes, the RPM of this blade is up to 5,600 RPM, And then we have a speed dial here as well. So if you want to slow that down for some reason, you can put the dial down to a lower number and slow down the speed on that saw. But again, you're going to operate from 2,500 on 1 all the way up to 5,600 RPM on 6. Now, something else we have to do to prepare this saw with the rail or with the track, really what makes a track saw is the ability to literally just lay this rail down and to see your cut edge and know that your blade is going to cut right on that line. Well, to do that, you have to kind of self-clearance this. In other words, the first cut is going to set the actual track up with this saw. So the blade's going to cut right through this little black edge right here and provide that perfect straight line of where that blade is going to travel. So when it comes from the factory, from Milwaukee, this is sticking out past where it's actually going to be. So your first cut needs to be on some junk material, and you're going to basically set the track on a full length piece of wood, and then start the saw, depress it, run it all the way down the track to make sure you use clearance or set the cut line on the full rail. We'll show that here in just one moment. So you'll see here, I'm right here at the end of my rail, but I'm going to back it up till the saw's almost off, but I'm going to go ahead and plunge it and start cutting this. Now I've got it set to plunge about 3/4 of an inch with the rail or with the track, and then I'm going to run it all the way down this rail and finish cutting, and then I'll come back and cut this last little piece after that. So you saw that it's now cut through the black stuff. The black stuff flew everywhere. And now we're going to actually trim this all the way down to make sure we get a good cut line. And that's what we have left over after we cut that off in a nice straight trim line. Now I forgot to do one thing, and I bet you guessed it. I did not put on a dust extractor, nor did I attach the bag. So let's clean this up and then see how well the bag works. Okay, this time we will attach the bag, and that should help. I'm going to back this up and finish cutting. Now we have a nice, perfect cut line on our rail, on our track. Now here's the beauty of the track saw. I've got a few things I need to cut on this plywood, and I've got some crow's feet here. I don't have to draw any lines. I just have to lay my edge right on the tip of that crow's foot, and that's where the blade's going to cut. So once I get those lined up, I'm ready to go. Now I've got my plunge set for a little more than a 1/2 inch because this is 1/2 inch plywood, a little less than a 1/2 inch. And then I have a piece of foam underneath. So I've got it set to where it's going to protrude probably an 1/8 inch or so past that 1/2 inch, probably about 5/8. And again, I've got my rail lined up on my marks. Back this up off the edge. Crank it up, plunge it, and go. You can see with the dust bag, we're still getting a little dust, a little particulate that's actually coming out the front of the stall most of the time when we start and when we stop. But this is a lot better than what we were getting without the bag at all. Of course, with dust extraction, that should get better. Now, if we had a longer rail, we had our 106-inch rail, then obviously we could span it across this whole length of plywood. In this case, I'm just going to use my 55-inch. So I should be able to line up where I'm wanting to go to the crow's foot, back to where I'd been, and still make a very perfect cut. And again, you can see the start and stop, we get a little dust, and everywhere else it stayed very, very clean. And just like that, we've ripped the full length of our plywood. Now let's go ahead and change out our splinter guard. So we pulled it out, the clear view window, and now we'll put on our splinter guard. And then remember, we need to self-clearance this because, by the way, we have our battery out. If I didn't say that already. You'll see when my blade comes down, it's actually going to hit that splinter guard. So we have to self-clearance that by making a cut. Okay, so we have our splinter guard on. Now we want to lower this down till it touches the wood. Okay, and then lock that down. Just like self-clearancing the actual rail, we're going to do the same thing with that. So we're going to start it up and then make a plunge. And actually, for the splinter guard, we want to make the biggest depth cut possible. So now, when we look, we can see that's been cut away now. And so that's now going to ride right against the blade and give it the tightest tolerance possible. Okay, so for those of you that want to know about hardwood cutting, we've got a piece of Purple Heart. This is from Central and South America. And this is 8/4, so it's 2 inches thick, and you can see it's still kind of raw cut. There's really no side to index off of. But anyway, we're going to make a cut on this, and this has a Janka rating of 2520. So it's harder than walnut, harder than a lot of hardwoods. So we're going to see how well the Milwaukee saw will cut through this 2 inches thick of Purple Heart. Okay, so we've got our track now on the Purple Heart. We've also hooked up the dust extractor, and we've got the full depth set at 2 1/4 inches, but with the rail, again, we're going to be at about 2 inches, but we should be still good with the Purple Heart. It is right at 2 inches. So we'll see, do we get a full depth of cut here? And is it going to be able to power through this? Because again, the Janka rating on this wood is quite high. Now I started to pull this off the end and start my cut, and I thought, no, I'm going to truly plunge this down into that full depth of cut as well as full blade grab of the full 2 inch Purple Heart. And it bogged it a little bit as I was pushing on it, but not bad at all. It easily cut through that. You can see the cut is just very nice. Of course, this is where I started my cut right here and then backed it up and put it here. So little mark, I really can't feel anything, but I see a shiny space right there, but I cannot hang my nail on anything there. So it's really just where it almost kind of polished that edge right there, but you can see it. But again, that's where I started the plunge, and then I came back and finished it right there. But love this wood and the purple tones that are in it. Really cool wood. without any sanding. It's really more brown in here than you realize when you actually put some oil on it. You can see here on our cut, even though we don't have a good edge really index off the top, you can see we're still no gaps there for our 90. One thing I forgot to mention is the indexing here at 22.5 degrees. So obviously we showed 0 to 45, where basically you just loosen up your thumb screws and you can go from 0 to 45. And then we showed the lockout to 48 degrees and a -1. But if we pull this out and turn this around to 22.5, now it's going to lock out right at 22.5. Pull this back out, turn it around, and now it's going back to 45. So very easy, just pull it out and lock it to make your 22.5 degree cuts. Now, if you're going to take a long time to come out with a tool after other tool brands have already done it, then you probably should take note of those features, what works, what doesn't, and come out with something that kind of eclipses all of them. Has Milwaukee done that? We think they've done a pretty good job of doing it. We're very impressed with the features on this saw. It has plenty of power to cut, as you saw, through 2-inch thick of hardwood. Specifically, this is the Purple Heart. And again, the Janka score, I think, somewhere around 2,500. And it did that without any issue. Now, could you push it really, really hard? No, you had to kind of let it cut through and make the cut, but it did it absolutely fine, even in the full plunge cut through this hardwood as well. Cutting plywood, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, not going to be a problem at all. Cutting your bevels, things like that's not going to be a problem. Now, when you go into hardwood with your bevel, again, that's going to kind of get harder, obviously, because you got more blade contact when you're making those bevel cuts. But as far as the abilities with the features to make those changes with the saw, very easy to do so. Very minimal movement on the rail, especially when you tune it. You really almost fully eliminate any rock on that saw on the rail, and you get a nice, perfect cut, at least as good a cut as you're going to get on most table saws. So for the price of this tool, now this is not a cheap tool by any means. So the 2831-21, which is the kit, which comes with the pack out, with the rail, with the 6 amp hour battery, the charger, the blade, and the saw, you're looking at $639, and that comes with a 5-year warranty. Now, you can buy the tool only, but that's at like $399, so you're looking at $400. It really makes sense to step up and get the whole kit. Now, the 55-inch rail is going to run you about $129, and the 106-inch rail is going to run about $250. So the rails are not going to be cheap, but again, that's pretty much standard across the board, somewhere around that range. There's some of the real cheap ones that are cheaper, but there's a reason why. And most of your name brand or of your higher end tool brand, so your Milwaukee, your Makita, your Festool, and some of the other ones are going to work across different platforms. So I could run this on a Makita, you could run the Makita on here. However, you have to watch your cut line, because the cut, the spacing of the blade offset from the rail is going to be different. So you need to replace your edge guard there and make sure that you're cutting correctly. So best case scenario is to buy the rail for the saw, and then you get that true cut right on that line. So be sure to check it out for yourselves. We'll have a link in the description. You can also get clamps with this also, as well as other clamps. We'll work on this as well. So be sure to check it out. Also keep track of us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and even TikTok. And if you don't mind, would you hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't done so already? And by all means, if you hated our video, well then let us know in the comments. Have a great day and keep smiling.